Welcome to the Third Eye Show, which brings you ancient wisdom as well as cutting-edge investigations into the mysteries of the universe. The Third Eye Show celebrates our diversity, like the unique beauty of each individual wave, and our oneness, like the magnificent ocean from which each wave emerges. We are all one in spirit as we live on this earth plane. The third eye is said to be able to see into the spiritual and psychic realms. At a time when our lives, our country, and our planet are undergoing intense transformations, we will explore topics that will fascinate, enlighten, and empower. Join us as we witness the thrilling ways spirit manifests in our daily lives and the varied paths we choose to create heaven here on our earth. The Third Eye Show is created and offered in love and light.
Hi, I'm Patty McDonald, and today we are doing an interfaith panel. And with me today are four people of various spiritual and religious paths, including myself. And the purpose of doing this show, the reason that I feel it is so important, is that I think that intolerance for other religious or spiritual beliefs or practices is really widespread in the world, and I think that it leads to violence and to war, and probably has, going back many thousands of years. And I think it's a real issue. And I believe personally that knowledge is power, and that knowledge also has the power to dispel ignorance and a misunderstanding. So that's really part of the reason for this show. So I hope that after seeing this show, that you will come away from it, with some more understanding about different faiths.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Javed Chaudhry. I live in Brattleboro, Vermont. I'm a Muslim.
My name's Steve Chase, and I live in Keene, New Hampshire, but I'm a member of the Putney Friends meeting of the Religious Society of Friends, which probably most people would know as Quakers.
And I'm Patty McDonald, as I said before, and I'm here as a pagan. This is the spiritual path which is closest to my heart, so I'm going to be talking about that today. And I live in southern Vermont also.
I'm Jim Levinson. I'm the spiritual leader of the Brattleboro area Jewish community in Brattleboro, Vermont.
Hi, my name is Tom Redden. I teach at Southern Vermont College in Bennington, and I live outside of Brattleboro, Vermont, and I am a Zen Buddhist priest. Happy to be here.
Okay. So the first thing I would like to do, I guess, is to start off with each person, just giving, and I know this is hard to do, but kind of a brief summary of the basic tenets and basic beliefs of your faith. Just so that people will have some sense of what it is. Our time is limited, so unfortunately we can't, each of us can't go on for 20 minutes or more of it.
We'll do our elevator speeches.
But we can do our elevator speeches. But we can start at this end again, if that's okay.
Muslims emerged out of the Abrahamic tradition. We believe we are the seal and the finality of the message of Abraham. Muslims are essentially Jews and draw much of the inspiration from the Christian tradition. Like our brothers and sisters, the Jews, we believe in the creed, the Lord thy God, the Lord is one. And our entire religious tradition, our faith, our laws are derived from the entire tradition that comes down from Judaism through Christianity to Islam. We differ in this. We do not believe in the original sin. We believe all human beings are born without sin. And the purpose of life for every Muslim is not to seek personal redemption, but to leave the world a better place than we found it.
So the Religious Society of Friends emerged in the 17th century during a period of political and religious upheaval. But I would say our deepest, sort of the deepest historical traditions for us, like what you were saying, to be, is the prophetic stream of Judaism, sort of as opposed to the more priestly and legalistic. And so for Quakers, one of the favorite prophets would be Micah. Of what does your Lord require of thee? To do justice, to love compassion or kindness, and walk humbly with thy God. And Quakers are sort of, in the 17th century, were challenged the Christianity of their day, feeling that it had been that a lot of history of Christianity says, well, in the 4th century, Christianity converted the Roman Empire. Quakers have always believed that essentially in the 4th century, the Roman Empire converted Christianity to an imperial, anti-Semitic, and violent religion. And that there have been very movements of renewal around that to transform to what Quakers called primitive Christianity, which was essentially a Jewish renewal movement led by Jesus. And Quakers believe in differently. There's diversity of opinion. Is Jesus a great spiritual teacher and revelation of the nature of God? Is Jesus the true prophet that Moses talked about? Is Jesus the Messiah? Is Jesus the only begotten Son? So there's diversity of opinion. For us, the core is, what is the way of Jesus? What is the way of loving God, loving each other, our neighbors, including our enemies, and loving God's good earth? And I think what makes Quakerism somewhat distinct from other forms of Christianity, whereas, say, Catholicism, the authority, religious authority, is in the church hierarchy. In Protestantism, the religious authority is the Bible. That's sort of the final word. Whereas Quakers think that the community, the faith community, is important, Scripture is important, but fundamentally it's going to sort of the source of our faith tradition, which is the Spirit of God, and listening to that of God in ourselves and in our community. And so it is both mystical, evangelical, and prophetic.
Oh, thank you. That was very interesting. Okay, and I'm going to talk about paganism. Basically, paganism, it's also called Wicca, is a nature or earth-centered spirituality. And it includes, total reverence for our planet, for all life forms, humans, animals, plants, trees, everything. And also the belief that the divine and spirit is present in all living things. And there's also, part of that also is a reverence for the cycles of nature, the changing of the seasons, or as pagans call it, the wheel of the year. And we see the changing seasons as a metaphor for the cycle of life. For example, spring being birth, summer being maturity, and the peak of life, fall, old age, and then winter, death, and then followed again by rebirth in the spring. So it's this ongoing cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And most pagans do believe in reincarnation and karma, and that the spirit lives on, after it leaves the physical body, and it lives on in a place which some pagans call Summerland. And pagans do not judge the religions or lifestyles or sexual identities of other people. We believe that everyone is free to live and love in whichever way they want to, as long as they're not causing harm to others or coercing other people. And there's a saying in paganism and Quaker which sums that up. If it harm none, do as thou wilt, which I feel very strongly about.
Thanks.
Jim?
Thanks, Patty. The practice of Judaism is in fact so diverse that the worship practices of some Jews would be unrecognizable by other Jews, but there are some important principles that many of us believe. We are part of that same Abrahamic tradition that Javed spoke about. In fact, Javed and I did something interesting in Brattleboro, which was to have what we called an Abraham's family reunion, as if this were three branches of a family which had drifted apart and misunderstandings had arisen, and it's time for a reunion to get these groups back together and talk about some of these misunderstandings. It was a great success. One of the beliefs that I think many of us share is a belief that creation is important but that it's not finished. How can it be finished when there's poverty and disease and unnecessary suffering in the world? So to help complete that work of creation, each of us needs to be a partner of God, partner of the divine, to roll up our sleeves and get to work in completing that work of creation. A second is a belief that the Messiah, or as we would say in Hebrew, Mashiach, is yet to come. We certainly believe that Jesus was a great teacher and a great Jewish rabbi, but that we are still waiting for Mashiach. But while we are waiting, we can be providing messianic moments for others. We can make a difference in the lives of other people, and that's out of this prophetic tradition that Steve was talking about. And thirdly, a belief in the meaning of the word Israel, meaning in this case not the country but the Jewish people. The word Israel tracing back to our ancestor Jacob, who wrestled with the angel, meaning so that the word Israel literally means wrestling with the divine, meaning that rather than accepting doctrinaire principles, we're encouraged as are Muslims to challenge and to question authority and even to wrestle with God.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you, Patty. Buddhism is a religion that begins with the historic figure of Siddhartha Gautama. And the so-called historic Buddha lived about 2,500 years ago, and his life spanned about 80 years. And Buddhism is interesting in that it was something of a rebellious religion against the dominant culture of the time, which was Hindu. And the Buddha grew up, and to understand Buddhism, we really have to understand the story a little bit about this individual called the historic Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. And young Siddhartha Gautama grew up as a prince, and his father was given the opinion that he may either be a worldly prince or in fact a spiritual prince. And so the father basically gave young Siddhartha every single comfort that one could imagine. And he protected him from the ills and the sufferings of the world. And yet as a young man, he was out riding one day, and the story goes that over a period of a short period of time, Siddhartha saw a sick man, an old man, and a corpse. And Siddhartha was absolutely stunned by this because he was not used to seeing such suffering, and he was totally perplexed and flabbergasted that people were living this way because he had lived a life of such luxury. And the last vision he had was of a monk, a seeker, a wandering spiritual person who was living on his own. And so young Siddhartha left the palace, left his wife and his child, and went out and spent the next 6 years with the most prominent teachers of the day, almost died through a very, very rigorous ascetic practice, finally abandoned sort of extreme asceticism, and found what was known as the middle way of moderation. And after about 6 years of vigorous practice, he decided that he realized he was on the cusp of a great realization. And so the story goes is that the Buddha sat beneath this tree that one can visit in Bulgaria, India, and said to himself, I will not wake up until I understand why people suffer. What is it that makes people happy? What is this life about? And the story is that by the morning, rising of the morning star, the Buddha had come to this great enlightenment. That enlightenment is the basis of the religion of Buddhism. And his basic insight that he gained through this incredible night, this incredible journey that he took through his deep and profound meditation, is that people suffer basically because they cling to life. They cling to their ego, they cling to their attachments, they cling to their opinions. And so what the Buddha argued is that what we need to do is, number one, to recognize this. And number two is that we have to learn to live a life in which we're free of that. And he lays out what's called the Eightfold Path, which in essence basically says is that you live an ethical life. You don't cheat, you don't steal, you don't use intoxicants, you learn how to meditate, you learn how to be mindful in your life. And in the process, what the Buddha argued is that one understands that there really is no separation between one and others, and that one is able to learn to love oneself, learn to love the world, and develop a profound capacity for loving kindness. The other thing about Buddhism is that the Buddha argued that everyone in the world is capable of becoming a Buddha, and that it basically comes through human effort. It's not because of a divine presence. Buddhism does not believe in a supreme being. It's basically through the efforts of every individual, and therefore through our own efforts we're really able to realize true happiness. So in a nutshell.
Do you all feel is the biggest misconception about your faith? And probably all of you are thinking, just which is the biggest misconception? How about plural? Because there are probably many.
I think the biggest misconception in the West certainly is primarily at this point that Islam is a violent faith, and that Muslims are essentially violent and intolerant of other faiths. In fact, we are ordered by God in the message of the Quran, the Muslim Bible, to be tolerant of all faiths. And we're told that God sent messengers to all humanity over the eons. And there's a figure mentioned, 132,000 prophets and messengers. For us also, essentially, Tom has mentioned Buddhism. We, I think, are the only one of the major faiths that accepts the Buddha as a prophet. And it's very important for us to accept that, because essentially we see in the Buddha's message, same message that Jesus preached, that Muhammad preached, and various other prophets preached at the same time, over time. We're also forbidden to initiate war. A Muslim may not go to war except in self-defense, and the rules are laid down very specifically. The Quran states, fight those who drive you from your homes, but if they desist, stop. For peace is better than war, and God loveth not the aggressor. So be not the aggressor. At this point in time, unfortunately, for a number of reasons, which we need not get into at this point, there is a conflict which various people are calling the clash of civilizations. And the clash of civilizations is, in their mind, a clash between Muslims who are of another civilization and culture and Jews and Christians who are of a different one, forgetting, as I said, that we are essentially the same tradition. And also Muslims are ordered to accept Jews and Christians, particularly Jews and Christians, as the people of the same book. And Muhammad said to Jews and Christians that you too are Muslims, because being a Muslim means accepting the will of God to do what is right in this world. One small area of misconception today, which I keep listening to every now and then, is the idea of the Muslim God being different. And I've at times been accosted by people and accused of being worshipping an idol, which surprised me because we believe in an unseen God. The name of God in Islam is the same as the name of God in Judaism. It is a name that Jesus took on the cross when he said, Ilahi or Eloi, why have you forsaken me? The name of God in Islam is Ilahi or El or Allah. And essentially these are the main areas where I feel there are misconceptions.
Thank you. I'm really so glad that you said that, because I think a lot of people, especially since 9/11, equate the actions of really not a few fanatics,
Yes.
with the whole faith. So I think what you've had to say is really important and especially relevant today, in these times.
Thank you very much.
So thank you. Okay.
I think one of the misconceptions about Friends or Quakers is usually people go, oh yeah, you're the Amish, right? Imagining that we don't use technology, that we live on farms, and that our idea is to be sort of separate from the core element of what we're about is doing God's will on earth and transforming what has been called the reign of God, or as Martin Luther King used to talk about it, the beloved community, right here on earth, and that's the fundamental. I think the other thing was sort of the Amish image, or the image of the funny-looking man on the Quaker Oats box, is that Quakers are very quiet and polite. And while we try to be decent and kind, we also try to be rebellious. Martin Luther King had a great word for it. He was talking to the American Psychological Association in 1967 and said, the trouble with a lot of psychologists is that they believe that the goal of psychology is to make people well-adjusted to the world around them. And he said, I don't think that should be the goal, because you shouldn't be well-adjusted to evil. You shouldn't be well-adjusted to injustice. You shouldn't be well-adjusted to a number of things that he listed. You should be creatively maladjusted. And I think the great wisdom traditions from a lot of faith traditions, and it's certainly true in Quakerism, is this idea of how to be creatively maladjusted, and from early Quaker history in the 17th century in England, when it sort of emerged, Quakers were novel in the fact that it was the priesthood of all believers. So a lot of people say, oh, Quakers abolished the clergy. And actually, we abolished the laity. Everybody who comes to a meeting for worship, if they're moved to speak by the Spirit, gives ministry to the other people. And what was radical at that point was that women were included in this, that there was spiritual equality. But there were other things, just going back, that I think speak to what Quakers are. Is Quakers wouldn't tip their hat to their betters, to the kings. They believed in radical equality, that we are all neighbors, that we are brothers and sisters of each other, and that so they wouldn't tip their hat to the king. And they spent a lot of time being persecuted, put in jail, and that's often, I think, the sense of a real sense of the mystical of listening for God's presence, love, and guidance in our lives, but also the witness and expression of trying to, I loved how you put it, of being sort of partners with God to complete creation, in a sense, to build the beloved community in the reign of God, built on justice and equality, and very profoundly on peace. And Quakers have been known as pacifists who refuse to take up arms to fight for the state. But the deeper dimension is a real call to be peacemakers and to seek challenging, tough, but nonviolent alternative ways to resolve conflicts and sometimes to wage them.
One of the biggest misconceptions about paganism is that the way that witches are portrayed in movies are usually, their faces are usually green, and they're, these old ladies with, giant noses and big warts all over their faces, and they do evil things, and they cackle, and they put spells on people, evil spells, and they're some people to be feared, and they're bad and evil and ugly and horrible, and and sometimes people also believe that we worship Satan, that we, kill chickens and drink chicken's blood, that kind of stuff. I mean, people actually believe this because it is in the movies, and that is just absolutely, absolutely not true. Anyone who does that is not a pagan or a Wiccan. There would be something else. We don't actually believe in Satan. We don't believe in that concept at all. But I think that's the biggest misconception, and we don't go around putting spells on people. I mean, we do what's called maybe rituals or moving energy, which could be considered a spell, but we believe that it's not ethical to do that to another person because we feel that that's really putting your will or interfering with someone else's free will, tampering with someone else's psyche, really. So we really feel that is unethical. So usually the kinds of things that we do if we're doing a ritual is usually for healing. We might do a healing ritual for someone who's sick or injured or something, or for the planet, for peace. And usually if we do some sort of spell or ritual for ourselves, like say a person wants a relationship and doesn't have one, what you would do, what the correct thing to do would be to really to sort of do a ritual for yourself, to draw that into your life. Not to do a spell on Bob, say a person named Bob, because you happen to think he's cute or something, because that would be considered really a violation of that person's personal space. So I think those are huge misconceptions about Wiccans and pagans. We don't do any of that stuff. So hopefully that'll clear some of that up. So that stuff is strictly Hollywood. So, okay. Jim?
Let me say that listening to my colleagues, I'm reminded of the large number of Jews over the years who have gone exploring in these other religions. Large numbers of Jewish pagans and Jewish Quakers, Jews who have become Sufis, or Sufis in part, Sufism being a group within Islam we refer to as Jufis. And Jews who go exploring in Buddhism we refer to as Jubus. And there is indeed, there are strains of Judaism that relate very well to to Buddhist notions of freedom from attachment and emptiness. As Tom well knows, my wife spends 2 months every year in Bodh Gaya, India, at the place where the Buddha gained enlightenment. In terms of misconception, I think that's pretty easy for the Jews, and that's the notion that we are the chosen people. This has created all sorts of misunderstanding. What it does not mean is that we are considered by God to be better than others. Not at all. What it means rather biblically is that we have been chosen for certain responsibilities. The most important of these being what we speak of in Hebrew as tikkun olam, the responsibility of healing the world. I don't believe that that responsibility is only ours, alone, but it is a responsibility that we must take seriously. Rabbi Leo Beck, who was the chief rabbi in Berlin during the Nazi Holocaust, was accosted afterwards by a Jewish woman who said, "Enough already, can't we stop being chosen?" And Leo Beck, remembering the larger responsibility of Tikkun Olam, of healing the world, said, "No, now more than ever, when the world so needs healing."
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
It's, as we continue here, it seems that we see more and more commonalities, and in Buddhism, like all religions, there are many, many branches, and the order in which I was ordained was called the Zen Peacemaker Order, and it just struck me that in terms of, explicitly the Quakers, as well as other religions, the notion of assuming the role of peacemaker is in fact very explicit in this particular order of Buddhism. And the other thing, as Jim just spoke to about healing the world, is that one of the three vows that we take is the vow of bearing witness, the vow of not knowing, and the vow of healing. And so it's interesting that at least this particular Buddhist order is very explicit in terms of its intentions and how they overlap. I think that in terms of the question, I'm not sure how many people know very much about Buddhism, so that the misperceptions are actually probably relatively minor. And surely the consequences of those misperceptions don't carry any of the ramifications of something like Islam or Muslims, and the sort of the prejudices and the implications that those prejudices carry. What comes to mind in terms of Buddhism, the degree to which people understand it or the impression that they have of Buddhism, is that when people meditate, the idea is that people tend to zone out, is that people meditate to get away from the world. And, most Westerners, it's very interesting, if you went to Japan or Nepal, not Nepal, or Thailand, or some of these Buddhist countries, most people live Buddhism every day, but not very many people actually meditate. In the United States, where we have a small percentage of Buddhists, the high percentage of Buddhists in this country, in fact, do meditate. And one of the misconceptions, I think, about meditation is that one is trying to sort of escape the world. But what one is trying to do is to empty oneself of ego and prejudice and all of the sort of attachment and frustrations that we carry in our lives. And that the idea is that when we're able to sort of let go of that and let a lot of our anger and our frustrations dissolve, we're actually able to be in the world not only more compassionately, but more intimately. And so meditation, in fact, is not an escape. Meditation is a means by which we are able to be more intimate with the world and with others. So it's, in fact, it's a methodology of engagement as opposed to escapism. The other thing that may come up among folks is the notion of karma. Now, different traditions have a little bit different definitions of karma. In Buddhism, karma means very simply that one action has a consequence. If one has an action, you are kind or generous toward anyone, you're loving, you're helpful with someone, that kindness, in fact, will lead to a positive result in this lifetime, in your next lifetime, and in subsequent lifetimes. So there's sort of three levels of karma from a Buddhist, or at least surely a Zen Buddhist perspective. Therefore, and by the same token, bad karma, a bad action of unkindness or greed or anger toward others, in fact, will come back to basically haunt you in this lifetime, the next time, and lifetimes after. One of the misconceptions that people have about karma is the fact that we are bound by our karma. And the Buddha is very, very explicit, regardless of, if you will, the deficits or the assets we're born with. You know, some of us can run fast. Some of us are pretty good at math. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. That's not your life. And Buddhism is about taking responsibility for your life. If you're blessed with wealth or, physical gifts or not, the fact is that you're able to, in fact, transform that. And that everybody has the capacity to be happy. But again, it takes embracing this notion of an ethical life, a strong spiritual practice, and really committing oneself to a path of trying to be spiritually whole.
How can we, what can we do, or how can we promote respect for religious and spiritual beliefs which are different from our own? What can we do in our own lives, to do that? And it's a tall order. And I guess one thing would be this show is hopefully doing that to some degree, some of the people who are watching it. But what else can we do in our day-to-day lives? And I guess instead of going around the table, I think I'll just open that up to discussion and see what people think.
I believe it's your turn now. Thank you.
So I think we can just sort of jump in on that.
Right, I'm happy to tackle one small
Sure.
piece here. My beloved wife has the good fortune of being a member of Jim Levinson's Jewish community in Brattleboro, Vermont. And one of the realities of faith communities is that they are led by individuals. And I think one of the, if we look at the religious strife in the world, if it's the former Yugoslavia between ethnic and religious groups, if we look at Iraq today, if we look at Sudan, if we look at Northern Ireland, if we look at the places where religion has played an important role in conflict, it seems to me the political leaders and often the religious leaders have been the ones who have used religion as a vehicle for obtaining power and, in fact, abusing power. And I think that if we look at some of the so-called, the issues around the so-called culture wars in the United States of America today, it seems to me that we have to hold many of our religious leaders responsible for generating what amounts to hatred between different religions. And it's very, very easy to appeal to people's fears. A demagogue, as Hitler and others proved, is that fear is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful human emotion. And I think one of the things that we have to, the press and individuals have to hold responsible are the religious leaders in particular who are using religion in any way other than in a loving and in kind way toward others. And I think that one of the great blessings my wife Kim has in being part of Jim Levinson's the community which he leads is the fact that he's able to challenge his community in asking the right question, in asking tough questions. He's asking not only about the critique of the world, he's asking people to look very, very hard at their own lives. And this is a guy who inspires many, many people in his community to really reach across sectarian and political and religious lines to really open oneself up and really get to the heart of all religions, which is really about learning how to love one another. So I applaud what Jim does in his work, and I think that we have to look hard at the leadership across the country in this light.
I think that's an excellent point.
I have to.
Yeah.
I have to thank
Thank you for saying
Tom. I have to thank Tom for that. Goodness, and also to say that one of the reasons that it's possible to do some of those things is that we have such a remarkable community of kindred spirits in this part of New England. I think you're right, Tom, about these culture wars. One of the thoughts that strikes me is that the greatest religious struggle in the world today probably is not between Christians and Muslims, or between Jews and Christians, or between Muslims and Hindus, but rather between those of us who believe that God is with all of us and those who believe that God is only with them. And indeed, there are individuals who fuel the fire on that latter notion. I am constantly on the watch for anyone who is defining any religion by its extremists. I certainly never want to be defined by those extremists in my own religion. In ancient times, Rabbi Hillel was asked the question, asked to provide the essence of the Torah, of our holy book, while standing on one foot. And so there was Rabbi Hillel trying to figure out what he was going to say. And what he said was, love thy neighbor as thyself, and all the rest is commentary. And I find it interesting when we just look at the texts of these other religions that this notion is so common among us. In Christianity, the words are, always treat others as you would like them to treat you. In the Wiccan tradition, the words are, everything you do, whether positive or negative, is returned to you threefold. In Hinduism, quote, this is the sum of all duty. Do not do to others what would cause pain if done to you. In Islam, no one of you is a believer until you desire for another that which you desire for yourself. And in Buddhism, hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful. And I'm sure the Society of Friends has just so many different ways of saying
A couple
Yeah.
of quotes. And you notice it took out an entire book.
But see how those quotes are all basic, they're all saying the same thing.
Indeed.
They really are. And so I think you were right really in talking about the religious leaders and how they really perpetuate this myth of the differences between us, and how, there's that idea that some religions have that, our way is the only way. If you don't believe what we believe, then you're doomed. That kind of thing, which is really destructive.
I remember when I was a child and visiting my aunt's family, who was, she was sort of a schism from the Southern Baptists. She believed that Billy Graham was a communist, and and so she was a very thin slice of the most sort of extreme form. And she would tell that her children, my cousins, that their job was to save us, or we would burn in hell forever. And what saving meant for her was you had to believe these very specific sort of mechanical beliefs. If you believe these things and can say these things, you get your ticket punched to a great afterlife. Everybody else burns forever. And I've read a lot of the Gospels in the Christian scriptures, and I never hear Jesus saying that. He never says, well, what do you need to do to really be saved or live a godly life? He never says, believe that my mom was a virgin, believe that I am God, and believe that God has three different parts. He never says, what does he say? He typically doesn't say, believe me. He says, follow me. and there's a path. And one of the things that I have loved about Quakers is that the focus is not on the specific beliefs, but on the example and the pattern and the path. And I do have one quote that I'd love to read, and this is from John Woolman, an American Quaker who worked a lot on issues around poverty and working on the abolition of slavery. But I think that this goes to your question, which is, there is a principle which is pure, placed in the human mind, which in different places and ages has had different names. It is, however, pure and proceeds from God. It is deep and inward, confined to no forms of religion nor excluded from any. Where the heart stands in perfect sincerity, in whomsoever this takes root and grows, of what nation soever, they become brethren in the best sense of the expression. And then there's a quick quote I'd like to read from William Penn, which I love. The humble, meek, merciful, just, pious, and devout souls are everywhere of one religion. And when death has taken off the mask, they will know one another through the diverse liveries that they wear here that makes them strangers.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. Thank you.
Very sweet.
Both of them. I love that.
The first one is, I think, what we're doing right now, speak out to people, reach out, open yourselves up to people, participate publicly in discussion, draw people in, speak at schools. I think one of the nicest things I've found, and I believe it's B'nai B'rith's Jim, who's gone to almost every public school in the country to speak about the Holocaust and to set up Holocaust remembrance. I think it's one of the most wonderful things that could have been done, because it's opened up a consciousness in schools right across this country, in the minds of children, for whom even Christianity is an unknown. And it's opened up the world of other faiths and religions and cultures to them. And I think that is one of the ways we could talk. I try to go to schools and churches, and Jim and I worship together, our families. We worship with in other churches. What we have in Brattleboro, in Greenfield in Brattleboro, is an interfaith community organization. It's an organization, a body that meets regularly. And there are activists and there are people who are not activists, but we meet together to talk about issues and to take the issues into the public sphere. I'm very impressed, even more than I am by our own community in Brattleboro, about the Greenfield community, which has included not only Baha'is, who are part of the Abrahamic tradition, incidentally, but Pagans as well, and other faiths, and actively participate in functions at the consecration of a church, a Lady of Peace in Tennis Falls. Every faith participated, not just Christians, but there were Jews, there were Baha'is, there were Pagans, there were Buddhists, and we all participated in the reconsecration of the church, because the Catholic churches, one church was closed down, and this was opened up. So I would urge everybody, participate in each other's worship. Take part in it. We don't have to go through all the rituals. What Jim didn't talk about was that at the Abrahamic family reunion, we had a breaking of the fast at the end of the month of Ramadan. Jews, Christians, Muslims fasted, and we met together to break the fast. At the end of the breaking of the fast, Muslims always pray. It turned out to be sunset, so in the same room, in one corner, Muslims were praying. In one area, Jews were praying. In another area, Christians were praying. And you could hear the murmur of the worship fill up the entire room. I think, as far as I know, this is the only such worship in the entire world.
That's wonderful.
And we participated together, we shared together. Now, when you share together, you understand each other. You see the human side of each one of us. And that is what we forget. I think the problem with many people who speak of religion is they forget that in this world we have to live with one another, with human beings. God is in all of us. We can worship God privately, we can worship God publicly, but we cannot live without each other. We can live without God, but we cannot live without each other. And we forget that that humanity, the humanity in all our faiths, is a single most important thing that Abraham, Moses, the prophets, Jesus, Muhammad, the Buddha spoke about. So if we take that message out to people saying, you and I are one, we are the same people, we bleed together.
This is beautifully said. Thank you to all of you today for participating in this. And
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, buddy.
you're welcome. And it was a gift to me as well. And thank you to all our viewers for watching. And I hope that you will, heed some of these messages and inspirational things that you've heard today, and try to incorporate them into your life. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are mysterious sites in Ireland where, for millennia, people have been drawn by the convergence of energies that magnetize and suffuse them. These are holy places. We know neither who was inspired to construct them nor why, but we can feel their power and see the beauty of the sweeping vistas they command. We arrived at Ura on a fresh morning after a steep climb up a thickly muddy hillside. Beautiful low Inchiquin sparkled in the distance, and the scene was framed by the famous mountains of Kerry. Here there were broad views on all sides. The stones were imposing and majestic. After spending some time in silent appreciation, I stepped into the circle to discover what my third eye might reveal. Unexpectedly, I was immediately struck by a deep sadness, and heard screams and the clash of metal, and knew that this was a mass grave, a place where lives had been cruelly cut down and hearts had been broken. Although long, long ago, the tragic echoes of that day still rang among the stones, like traces of a lingering scent, and for a moment I bowed my head and acknowledged their ancient loss. The treasures of the Valley of Banan have been rescued from years of neglect, and a heritage park now makes these multi-period archaeological sites available to anyone who cares to stroll gravel paths to witness 5,000 years of history and folklore. Mike and I easily found the Bronze Age stone circle known locally as the Judge and Jury. This ancient ceremonial site was part of a calendar that was based on lunar and solar cycles. Now preserved for future generations, it forms a centerpiece of the Banan Heritage Park. The park boasts several unusual sites and artifacts, and the famed Ring Fort is without a doubt the most fascinating. The Banan Ring Fort, a fortified dwelling at least 2,000 years old, is one of the largest in Ireland and offers a spectacular view of the surrounding mountains of County Kerry. Even millennia after being abandoned, I could feel the vibrant life that had once played out within the safety of its embankments. Even today, in the age of disbelief, many Irish accept as true that fairies inhabit these ancient abodes. Hence, they are known locally as fairy forts. Legends warn us not to take fairies, or the good people, as they are often called, lightly. for they are quite sensitive to slights and exact terrible responses to insults, however unintended. For my part, there was nothing to fear from the good people, as I honor them as well as their magical habitations. I know that when visiting, a gift is expected, so before stepping outside the embankment, I filled it with the bright light of good wishes. There is no better gift than that. The Schronborn stone circle sits at what seems to be the end of the world. Surrounded on all sides by steep and desolate peaks of rock and rubble, with nothing but sheep for company, one has to wonder what ever brought the ancient ones to this place, and whispered to them that this was where they must erect their circle. Was it a calendar? A place of ritual magic? I sensed nothing at all here, and so Schronborn keeps its secrets. Finally, as our long day was drawing to a close, Mike and I found the gem of the Bira Peninsula, Ardgroom Outward. This is a deeply holy place. Set high on a hillside that spans the bay, we could sense the power of this alignment all the way from the main road. And as we slowly made our way up the rock-strewn hill through mud and cattle, a song began to ring in our ears, a slow and deep thrumming vibration that filled the air, just as the blooming heather and firs captivated the breeze with their mingled scents. Closer still, and the stones came into view. This was a place of celebration and long-lost ceremony. The layers of time seemed to peel back, to reveal a past that was rich and magical. People left tribute here, a stone, a coin, a feather. I felt akin to those who had walked this hill before to revel and rejoice at its summit. I was one of them. As the last rays of the sun dropped down behind the hill, I stretched out my arms and broadcast love and thanks to the hills and the stones and to all that is Ireland.